And what occurred to me is that when she went through this story, I felt sadness. I felt a sense of sadness. And I realized that the scars of racism can be inherited through generations.
No, I'm not worried at all. I rely on God, Allah.
So I had an opportunity actually to speak with my mother, on the phone for a little while before I visited her in person. And, I noticed some sadness in her voice. And there are a few family tragedies that have occurred recently for us. And, obviously with the general lockdown, there could be sadness emanating from that. And so I asked her, I'm like, why, it seemed like, you're somewhat sad. And so she explained that, yeah, every Eid I do get a time where I feel a little bit sadness. Every Eid I do feel some sadness. And I asked her, I'm like, why do you feel sadness every Eid? Why do you get a little bit of that feeling of sadness? And she told me, she said, well, that's because my father used to feel some sadness every Eid. And I said, okay, well, why did why did your father feel sadness every Eid? Isn't this a day of celebration? She said, when his father on Eid, when he was coming home one day, so this was on the day of Eid, he had went out to buy some gifts, some toys, some clothes for his family. So they had 8 kids, 5 sons, 3 daughters, and we're talking about 1947. So this is what we're talking about. So we're talking about, many years ago. And so he said he went out to buy some gifts and whatnot for the family because why? It's the day of Eid, it's the day of celebration. And when he was coming home, he was killed by a Hindu nationalist. And so you have a family of 8 children who are now fatherless, and they had to leave their homes because of the racism that they experienced, because of the threat to their lives that they experienced. A family of 8 kids without their father, without their main breadwinner, had to make an exodus. They had to leave their home in India and they had to go to Pakistan. And in that year, my great grandmother had to raise these kids. So imagine that year, not only travel, but then henceforth raise 8 kids by herself. And my grandfather was about 8 years old at that time. He was the 3rd child. And of course, this is going to be ingrained and implanted in his memory for life. And it was it was a hard life that they had to live because Pakistan at that time was a new country and it was developing itself. And there was a lot of Muslims because of racism, because of discrimination, and all forms that took had to migrate. They left. Unfortunately, also many Muslims over the years that migrated from India to Pakistan, unfortunately, they also felt some forms of racism. And so my mother describes what my grandfather and his family had to do for many years. They would have to you would have different children sleeping at different relatives' homes. And they would eat at different relatives' homes. So, okay, we're going to go eat at our uncle's house dinner. Okay, you two go eat at your aunt's house today. And they would try to manage their life and survive. Okay. And she mentions how he would say that his aunt used to take such good care of him and show him that love, right? That shows you what the capacity, what love can do in terms of building someone when hate and racism can destroy people's lives. And what occurred to me is that when she went through this story, I felt sadness. I felt a sense of sadness. And I realized that the scars of racism can be inherited through generations. Because I had a family member that was killed because of racism. When my father immigrated as a teenager to Canada, he tells me all the stories that he had to endure, because of racism, and how he had to play the game and survive and, try to build a family, being made fun of with your accent, being looked over for jobs. So he had to deal with, the racist attitudes that many people had. And that had an effect on him. To the extent I remember him advising me, he told me, like as if this was a known fact that gravity exists, or the seasons change, and that after darkness comes light, and then there's the sun, and then it comes darkness, like as if it was an immutable fact. He said that, listen, you're in a place where there is a lot of prejudice, but one thing that my father mentioned to me, he said, listen, there is prejudice. They're not going to treat you. They're not going to take you as they take their own. So you have to be exceptional. That's what he advised me to do. He said, you have to be exceptional, because unless you're exceptional, then you're not going to be accepted. You're not going to be able to advance within society. Okay. So these are the conversations, and I endured racism. I've endured racial epithets. I've due to the color of my skin, I've been singled out, had to get into fights. I've had to endure probably some of the most worst racism in professional colleges, and I would say that's where you see the nefarious effect of structural racism, which many people who obviously aren't exposed to that feel that doesn't exist. So this is our experience. Like, we're talking about generational scarring. We're talking about generation hurt and pain. And when I think about the story of my great-grandfather and what my grandfather had to endure, and the sadness that my mother endured, that makes me feel sad. So that heinous act of racism has affected our family from generations. And that's why I can be sympathetic to any other people that have experienced racism. I can be extremely sympathetic, and my heart goes out, and I can connect with those whose the effects of racism was the generational scarring due to slavery. To think about how your great-grandparents were treated and killed and brutalized and enslaved and treated like animals. I can appreciate that pain is not restricted to a single generation. I can appreciate that pain gets carried over, and that has a lasting effect, right? So let's be honest with ourselves, and let's understand and appreciate the hurt that all these different people have endured. And that's why not only should we listen, but listening is not good enough. Talking is not good enough. We need to forge a path that will bring somebody from darkness to light. And the only proper direction is if you go closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the only path that gives a solution for humanity. That is the only path that does that.
Do I feel that the New York police are providing enough protection, or do I have to have protection of my own? I look for protection from Allah.